Hey everyone, it's Drags, and it's Wednesday, August 22nd, time for episode 259 of Patriots Beat on the CLNS Media Network. Find us at clnsmedia.com. Follow us on Twitter at PatriotsCLNS. And for general sports coverage, follow us on Twitter at CLNS Media. Every neighborhood has a heartbeat, a place that represents the cultural epicenter of the area at its very core. In Boston's historic North End, that place is Boston Barber and Tattoo. Boston Barber and Tattoo has become home to A-list Boston celebrities like Gordon Hayward, Milan Lucic, Brad Marchand, and Aaron Baines. Boston Barber and Tattoo is more than just Boston's most well-known corner barbershop. It's also a tourist attraction for the hundreds of thousands of people that visit the North End throughout the year. Boston Barber and Tattoo, a North End landmark that represents the cultural epicenter of the area at its core, located at 113 Salem Street. This week I welcome Henry McKenna, who does an excellent job of breaking down all things Patriots for Patriots Wire on all USA Today platforms. You can follow him on Twitter at McKenn Analysis. That's McKenn Analysis. Welcome, Henry. How you doing?
Good, Trags. How about you?
I'm ready for the regular football season to begin, Henry. I got to tell you, I know we got to get through two more preseason games, starting with the Patriots game on Friday night in Carolina, their first road preseason game. But, you know, after a while, you watch the preseason games, and it's hard to kind of discern sometimes what's significant because of individual performances versus what the team is trying to get overall. Don't you get that kind of same idea?
Absolutely. I think it gets complicated trying to read into who's getting lots of playtime, who's getting none. You know, for example, in week one, Riley McCarron got some of the most snaps among the receivers. I think it was the most for a receiver. The next week, he didn't get very many. And you wonder, well, did they see all that they wanted to see in week one and realize maybe Riley isn't going to be a huge contributor as a receiver this year? And then on the flip side, Cordarrelle Patterson hasn't gotten a single snap on special teams so far this preseason. And the expectation for him was to be a starting kick returner and potentially a gunner on punt coverage.
Right.
We haven't seen either of those in game action. So it's kind of a mystery as to why maybe he's not playing. And Jason McCourty didn't play in the first week and played in the second. So you really never know, what exactly the end game is for playtime and performance and stuff like that when it comes to the Patriots.
Certainly, Henry, we'll get to the secondary because I want to break that down in more detail a little later on. But you did have a terrific post on the curious situation of Cordarrelle Patterson. You know, as you mentioned, he was brought to New England, and we all assumed primarily as a kick returner and someone who could do big-time damage on special teams, taking some of the burden off Julian Edelman, even though Edelman will be gone for the first four games, as it turns out anyway. And also he was brought to New England with Danny Amendola now in Miami. But what we've seen in the first two preseason games is that he has a significant role in the receiving game. You know, the way I read it, Henry, is the fact that I think they are trying to find out if Cordarrelle Patterson can really do damage in the receiving game because there is, a vacancy there to really step up and grab hold of.
Right. I think they're interested in seeing what happens when the ball goes in his hands because we've seen him at practice, and it feels like he's an effortless runner, and that's not necessarily a compliment. It kind of means he doesn't put enough effort into his routes. He rounds them off a little bit and maybe should be a little more precise with his footwork. And so, you think of him as sort of a downfield threat, but that may not be what he is. He's more of a check down option who can make a big play by breaking tackles in the open field. So we saw that in preseason, not once, but twice on what was nearly a long touchdown, but ended up just being a 20-yard gain when he stepped out of bounds. And then later he broke a tackle. I think it was Sidney Jones.
Right.
And scored a touchdown. So we've seen that Cordarrelle can make plays in space, kind of just like we've expected him to do in kick returning, because he gets space and he runs away with it. So the question then is, okay, so how can he contribute as a more versatile weapon? Because it's too much of a, well, I guess it could be okay to have him out there as just that sort of one-trick pony. But, if it's Belichick and if it's McDaniels thinking about it, they want him to be able to do more. You think back to the running backs last year, and I don't think Belichick and McDaniels liked that Mike Gillislee was a key indicator that the Patriots would be running, and James White is a key indicator that they'd be passing. They like guys who don't tell the defense what's going to happen before the snap. So if Patterson comes on and he's just a gadget player or a bubble screen player, then maybe the Patriots will work on developing him as a more versatile route runner, in the coming weeks.
I think, Henry, it goes without saying that when you're Cordarrelle Patterson and you come to New England, you have so much more around you than even, those high-flying days in Minnesota or last season in Oakland. There's so many more options offensively that a coordinator can use you in. And, when you take a look at, for instance, the very first series that Brady played on Thursday night against the Eagles, it was pretty much all James White out to the left, James White in the flat. And then the very next series, they changed it up and gave you a completely different look. That's, to me, a reason to expect that Cordarrelle Patterson could be a very big weapon in the Patriots offense.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. He is an interesting wrinkle in himself, right? Like the Patriots,
exactly.
They don't have to do all that much to put the defense on their toes. McDaniels is famous for coming up with interesting schematic wrinkles, but you just put Patterson on the field and it's a bit of a matchup problem. You don't have to overthink it. You can really just get him the ball in one way or another and see what happens. And generally, as history goes, good things happen. It's just that, I think maybe fantasy football owners will look at his stats and they'll say, hey, he's really not that much of a consistent performer. And that's not what, obviously, the Patriots need out of him. They need someone who is sort of a headache for opposing defensive coordinators, opposing defensive backs, and safeties to think about him all the time when he's on the field, whether he's getting the ball or not.
Well, and I think, again, going back to James White, I think you can make the argument he's as big a cog in that offense as Rob Gronkowski. I really think going into this season, he is going to be a huge part of what they do and taking a lot of the burden off Brady, because White is that dependable, check down back. But what we've seen from him in the preseason is I think he's going to have a bigger load in terms of running the football.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens when Rex Burkhead comes back, because he practiced yesterday and he is both a pass catcher and a runner, sort of versatile in that way. He kind of won over the red zone back job last year because he could do both things, and he was reliable in both sort of passing and running. So I think that's one guy who might cannibalize White's role, as may Sony Michel, depending on his health. But I do think that, especially in the early weeks, White will be as important as anyone, like you said, as important as Gronk maybe. Because of Edelman's suspension, there are so few receivers that Brady can count on week to week. Even Chris Hogan was sort of erratic when he came back from his shoulder injury last year. He was pretty consistent going into that injury, but when he came back, there were Sundays where he just disappeared entirely. And I guess that sort of happens sometimes with James White, but it's all according to the plan. Right. It's sort of it's not that he's disappearing because he's not going to make a difference. When James White is supposed to be a difference maker, I mean, look at the Super Bowl against the Falcons. Like, he makes a difference. So I'm with you in that regard. If the Patriots want to make him a focal point, he'll be a major focal point. And considering that maybe Sony Michel won't have come along as quickly as he should have with this knee injury, which has held him out for the better part of training camp, I think that you're right, that White will be a major factor. I think every year we hype up his role in the running game a little bit more than actually happens, than comes into reality. So I guess I'll do sort of cautious optimism in that regard, but definitely he'll be getting a lot of targets.
That's a fair point, Henry. I mean, we keep thinking that he's going to do more running, and I keep thinking that, but I think when he's in there, to your point, they don't want him to be an indicator of what they're going to do, right? I mean, they do not want, James White in the game and not running the football, because that, long term will keep defenses honest if he's running the football.
Totally. Yeah, and you look at his stats, I can pull them up real quick, but he never really runs the ball that much. But like you said, they're not his average is usually above 4 yards per carry. It's because they don't anticipate him to run. He still manages decent yardage. So last year he had 43 attempts at 4 yards a carry, and the year before he had 39 for 4.3 per carry. So, they'll do that on purpose, I think, to keep defenses honest a little bit.
Speaking with Henry, McKenna does an outstanding job covering the Patriots for Patriots Wire for USA Today. With over 8 million users across the USA and Canada, Game Time is the top destination for last-minute tickets to all major sporting events, concerts, and shows. Game Time is built for the urban millennial and the Gen Z customer that is always on the go and constantly optimizing the best last-minute experience. Game Time is the top destination for last-minute tickets to live events, and unlike Ticketmaster and StubHub, who overwhelm you with so many choices and steps, the Game Time app shows you only the best values and makes buying tickets incredibly fast and easy. To make selecting tickets even easier, Game Time shows you an actual high-res photo of the view from your seat. Plus, the Game Time guarantee has you covered. They will guarantee you'll receive your tickets in time for the event, and they'll be valid for entry. If that doesn't happen, Game Time will locate the comparable replacement tickets or give you a 100% refund. Whether you're looking for sports, music, or theater events, you can find all of them under one roof at Game Time. For $15 off your first purchase, visit usegametime.com/beat and use the promo code BEAT, B-E-A-T. Again, for $15 off your first purchase, visit usegametime.com/beat and use the promo code BEAT. Speaking again with Henry McKenna of USA Today, does a great job covering the Patriots for Patriots Wire. Let's move on to the defensive side of the ball. We spent the first part of this show talking about the offense. Your impressions of Ja'Whaun Bentley and why you think he might be running away with a starting linebacker job as a rookie out of Purdue?
I think the reason is twofold. The first thing you hear about Bentley is just how smart he is. And I was talking to Christian Sam, the rookie that was selected around after Bentley, and a guy who is learning the playbook. It's sort of obvious that he's learning it a little bit slower than Bentley. And that's no disrespect to Christian Sam. I mean, he's a rookie. These things take time. Unless, of course, your name's Ja'Whaun Bentley and you were a 4-year captain at Purdue and apparently a very, very hardworking and intellectual football player. And it shows how quickly he's been assimilated into this Patriots culture and the starting, group, because he's calling plays. And it's sort of a wild thought that he's calling the plays for Dante Hightower. He's calling the plays for Devin McCourty and Kyle Van Noy. I mean, they were all in the same huddle, and this 22-year-old, I got to fact check that age, but 21, sorry, is calling the huddle for, so many experienced veterans who've been in the system forever. So, I mean, I'm sure he's making some mistakes, just like, we see mic'd up rookie quarterbacks all the time, figuring out the jargon, the terminology. But to see him lead the team in tackles through 2 preseason games is impressive, especially because he didn't actually get that many snaps in week 2. He was he was just, in the group with all the starters. So I think it was like 16 snaps or something like that. And he still managed to log a bunch of tackles. So I think, his smarts, his production. And then, the biggest other reason is maybe that Landon Roberts has not developed in the way that the Patriots were hoping. He is a very solid run defender when he's doing the right thing. And it sometimes seems on film like he's guessing, like he's maybe going too instinctively toward the ball, too aggressively toward the ball. So there was an interesting play in week 1 where the two guys, Bentley and Roberts, were on the field together in a goal line situation. And it was sort of exemplary of their play. And I'll say, before I explain the play, I'll provide a caveat, which is that I didn't actually know what defensive play was called. So it's very possible that both guys were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. But
sure.
Anyways, the play is called, it's a run to the left, and Roberts books it right up the middle. You see sort of a gap,
yep.
and he just fires up the middle. And basically the running back sees Roberts coming and heads, behind his blockers to the left, and Roberts can't make a play. He's sort of a non-factor. And Bentley, on the other hand, is sort of getting in the right position, as the play develops, keeping an eye on the running back. And when the running back shows himself, Bentley breaks into the hole, meets the running back, and tackles him at the line of scrimmage or for a loss. I can't remember which one, but essentially we see two different styles of play, and one you would associate more with a veteran, and ironically it's the rookie, and one you would associate with the rookie, and ironically it's the veteran. So, that battle was on display maybe in that play in itself, and you saw who came out on top in that play. So we'll see. I think that it's early, and Belichick likes to tinker with his roster and his depth chart and see who can do what where. But I think the fact that Bentley got an audition with the first team and had such a successful audition with the first team is a good sign.
So I'm going to go way out on a limb here and make an analogy, making a comparison, because one of the guys that I saw in college that I was just a huge fan of at the time, and he's turned into a great, all-pro linebacker, is Luke Kuechly at Boston College. The reason I bring Luke Kuechly up is I think Luke Kuechly reads as well and plays as instinctively smartly, combining instinct and reading the offense and what they're doing, as well as any young linebacker in the game. And, when he came into the NFL, he was ready to go. And that's what Ja'Whaun Bentley reminds me of. He reminds me of a linebacker, as you said, 4-year player at Purdue, a captain, so obviously a leader who's very, very intelligent and studies the game. That's who Ja'Whaun Bentley kind of reminds me of because of those characteristics.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty lofty comparison.
It is.
I know you're going on a limb.
I am, but I got to tell you, he's shown me enough in terms of his instincts, both reading like running plays, like you mentioned, the goal line play that Belichick's talked about a couple of times. You've talked about. A lot of people have talked about that read and react play. Evan Lazar, my colleague at CLNS Media, had a great breakdown of that same play. It just seems like an instinctive example of how to play the position of linebacker, especially for the Patriots. But the other one, Henry, the other play I want to bring up is his breakup of the pass for Dallas Goedert in the back corner of the end zone, in the red zone, late in the first half, I believe it was, against the Eagles. And that is an indication of a linebacker who can not only play close to the line of scrimmage, he can break out in coverage, red zone, and cover a very obviously skilled tight end and break up a pass that would have been a touchdown.
And that is what is most surprising about Bentley. To even think that one could try and make the comparison of Luke Kuechly for a guy who at Purdue sometimes came off the field on third downs and passing situations is like wild, because I was trying to get at this and didn't quite get enough questions in. we randomly started probing Bill Belichick about projecting players to defense and how they might make that transition. And I was talking to him about, like what sort of indicators one can get to, and how dramatic those indicators have to be, because he's moved people from cornerback to safety, like Devin McCourty. And then there's the idea of moving someone all the way to the other side of the ball. So then you see a guy like Bentley, who's in college a first and second down player, and all of a sudden looks sort of like a 3-down player, or actually we can say definitely looks like a 3-down player in preseason. And regular season is different. That's why I add the sort of in preseason asterisk. But basically I was trying to eventually get to, okay, so how do you project a guy from college to have such a different role in the pros, especially when, the college coach thought that they were too limited to do that, and at a higher level somehow they can. So we'll see, whether Bentley's coverage abilities stand sort of the test of more complicated scheme when preseason is over. But his physical ability, seems to be there. It seems to be enough. And we've already talked about how his mental abilities seem to be there. So it would make sense that he's going to be able to be a factor on all 3 downs. I mean, again, it's a projection, but it's sort of interesting to see how Belichick anticipated this. And maybe he didn't realize it until camp, because otherwise Bentley might have been a higher pick than a 5th rounder, because linebackers who can cover in the NFL are so darn rare. But it's just tip of the cap to Bill, the general manager, as usual, at a time when they really needed just what Bentley might be. To find him in the 5th round would be, quite the gem.
What does Bill always tell us, though, Henry? He always says you don't know about the player until you really get them on the field and you see them and they're with your team. You just don't know. And that goes good for the good and for the not so good. And with Ja'Whaun Bentley, maybe it's for the very good, that maybe he has assets and skills that they didn't even see on film at Purdue, or didn't see a lot of when they scouted him, that he's displaying now. Maybe it's a matter of that case, and that's all it is.
Yeah, I think, we want to give Bill credit for finding gems like this, but ultimately, it's kind of like a Tom Brady situation where there's no way that anyone knew in the Patriots organization that Tom Brady was going to be who he is. And similarly, I think, Ja'Whaun Bentley, I bet they probably didn't have a great sense. They're looking at his traits and they say he could potentially develop into a coverage linebacker, right? But if they had thought, oh, he's definitely a coverage linebacker, then they probably would have picked him higher. It's just that. It's an example of just that, where Bentley probably got there and they thought of him as something, and they never really used those I guess preconceived notions against the player. Bill always says they have a blank slate. So, they drafted him because they thought he had a set of skills, but then once he got into the Patriots system, they experimented with him in as many ways possible, and they said, okay, looks like he can do this, and this, and then let's see what happens in preseason. And he's proved, to be a lot more than what his college film showed.
Speaking with Henry McKenna, doing a great job covering the Patriots for Patriots Wire for USA Today. I want to tell you about RX Bar, whole food protein bars with simple, real ingredients. RX Bar wants to build things the right way. RX Bar believes in the power of transparency and lets the core ingredients do all the talking, with all of them listed on the front of the packaging. You likely recognize RX Bar at the shelf. They're the ones who have egg whites for protein, dates to bind, nuts for texture, and other delicious ingredients like unsweetened chocolate, real fruit, and spices like sea salt or cinnamon. Turns out, real food ingredients actually taste really good. Whether you like sweet or savory, chocolate or fruit flavors, there's definitely an RX bar for you. Me? Well, I'm personally a big fan of the mint chocolate bar. It is just a great way to give me a boost of protein that I need in the afternoon, especially when I'm covering a Patriots preseason night game, which we have, of course, all the time during the month of August. For 25% off your first order, visit rxbar.com and enter the promo code TRAGS at checkout. Once again, for 25% off your first order, visit rxbar.com/TRAGS and enter the promo code TRAGS at checkout. Speaking again with Henry McKenna of Patriots Wire at USA Today. Okay, I want to rate your level of concerns, Henry, with the injuries. First round pick Isaiah Wynn out for the year with a reported torn Achilles. Sony Michel had fluid drained from his knee and expected to miss most, if not all, of the preseason. And then there's Duke Dawson, who's nursing a bit of a tight hamstring. What gives? What is your level of concern with those?
I think it's problematic that all three of them are dealing with an injury. I mean, luckily, the two injuries might not be long-term, but I don't know. You worry. I mean, the Patriots have a long history of drafting players who have injury histories, and it's not necessarily favorable. I mean, they got Gronk, a guy who fell into the second round. And aside from him, some of these injury-plagued players, Razai Dowling, Dominique Easley, Malcolm Mitchell, those are three that come to mind. I'm sure there are more, are guys that proved to be, too great of a risk. I mean, Easley left and is playing well in Los Angeles, but he had injuries while he was with New England, and that's why he didn't contribute very much. And then ultimately the rehabbing of those injuries may have been what led to his departure. So when a guy like Isaiah Wynn suffers a season-ending long-term injury, that's scary. I mean, he didn't have an injury history, but one as significant as an Achilles injury is really not great. I mean, luckily he's young, and so that helps. When Kobe Bryant, for example, suffered his Achilles, there was fear that he would never be able to come back to basketball. Again, a sport that's more explosive than maybe an offensive lineman, but it's a significant injury, I guess, is what I'm trying to say and have already said. And so, I think he'll be back next year and should be a contributor, but it's a little bit different of an expectation where the Patriots are on a one-year deal left with Trent Brown. And my thought has always been that they wanted Trent Brown to be their bridge player between Nate Solder and Isaiah Wynn. They were going to use Wynn as the sixth offensive lineman this year. And considering how often offensive linemen tend to get hurt, he probably would have plugged and played at some point during the year and gotten NFL experience. And then next year, maybe the Patriots ultimately let Trent Brown walk in free agency and they move Isaiah Wynn to left tackle, where he'll probably remain for many years. But now they won't be able to get that experience in for Wynn, and they can't get a greater evaluation for whether Wynn is ready for the job. So it puts their left tackle plans on hold, and maybe means they have to try and negotiate another deal, a year in the deal with Trent Brown before he puts too much tape up, because he's only making a little over $1 million, might be $1, I think, this year, which is an absurd value for a guy who could play all 16 games at left tackle. I mean, look at what Nate Solder just made. So that's a significant position, and even though Isaiah Wynn wasn't projected to be a starter in 2018, his injury kind of has an echo effect moving forward. And Sony Michel's injury, I just talked about all the players with injury history. He came into the league with that knee-on-knee, bone-on-bone, condition in his knee, and that could impact his career. And so, for a rookie running back to not be getting reps with the starting offensive line, to be forced to study the film and the playbook from, the meeting rooms, it's not great. And there's a good reason to think that a running back can step in and can make an impact. But you also kind of get nervous about, well, he hasn't played at football speed in a really long time. And when he was playing, it was the first time, again, he had played in a long time, looking at minicamp and OTAs. And so, could he pull like a hamstring now, right? I mean,
yeah.
Could his lack of conditioning lead to another injury? So it's definitely nerve-wracking. And then Duke Dawson, I'm not as worried because we haven't seen him out for that long. And he was playing pretty well. I mean, he was a little bit inconsistent in camp on one-on-ones and stuff, but he was getting first-team snaps. And I imagine that he'll lose the first-team job to Jonathan Jones, who's looked really good since he got back from injury. And Dawson will have a little bit of time to get healthy and make an impact sort of on the defense. But when he gets back, he could compete for that slot spot. But I guess I just think that these first-round picks, have to be so important going forward for this franchise. And to already see them both struggling with injuries doesn't leave a ton of room for optimism, at the very least in the short term. But the long term, it gets a little scary too, because knee injuries that you need fluid drained, almost immediately after getting onto the field, and that's just scary.
Well, I agree. And, to be very honest with you, I'm not as concerned about Isaiah Wynn because I think that's a fluke injury. I would like to think it's a fluke injury, and certainly, like you said, no injury history there. I actually think that Isaiah Wynn it was more of insurance against Shaq Mason leaving, and Shaq also in the final year of his deal looking to get, big time money on the free agent market. I think if they like what they see in Trent Brown early on, I think they might make the commitment. Like you said, he's making $1.9 million this year, and that's an incredible value. Maybe they try to get him locked up long term. Maybe his agent doesn't allow that to happen. But I think, if they like what they see in Trent Brown, and he's been, by all indications, and I'm sure you would agree with this, you've seen him day in and day out in camp, he's been tremendous. Maybe they try to sign Trent Brown long term and let Shaq Mason walk. I don't think there's a scenario where both Trent Brown and Shaq Mason are on this roster next year. Do you?
I don't think that they have the money to make it work.
I don't either.
So, but yeah, they really don't. I mean, I guess the only way it happens is if Trent Brown comes out and doesn't play well in the first few weeks. But then I don't know why they would want to re-sign him. So it seems like all Trent Brown can do is create a huge market for himself over the first few weeks of the season. And Shaq has already created a big market for himself at a position that's already becoming very highly valued. So from a money standpoint, I don't think they'd be willing to invest. I mean, they'd be investing probably $20 million a year in each of them in total.
Between them both, correct?
Yeah, so that's a major investment in one off season.
No, and if Isaiah Wynn, that's why I think the Isaiah Wynn pick was so big, and if they really liked, and he was getting more, he was improving, he was getting more reps with the first team, and obviously he came in and played right tackle. When Marcus Cannon's been out, but when Adrian Waddle came out after the first series with Brady against the Eagles, it was Isaiah Wynn at right tackle, and you had Trent Brown on the opposite side. I want to move to the secondary now before we wrap it up here, Henry. And do you see a situation where Jason McCourty and Eric Rowe are on this roster to start the season, and Jonathan Jones is the slot corner?
Yeah, I am not quite as sold to the idea that there's no way Jason McCourty makes the roster if he's not in the starting lineup. But I do think that he's definitely in a tenuous position because he's not a huge contributor on special teams. Seems like the Patriots are trying to figure out if he can contribute on special teams, but he's an older guy, and I don't know if that's going to be a big part of his game at this point in his career. So I think that they might want to keep Rowe and McCourty because of how important it is to have top-level talent at the quarterback position. People always, or Bill, I think, always says you can never have too many DBs. You can never have too many corners. So I think having 3 outside cover corners is a roster move that makes sense in today's NFL where passing is so important. And I'd say Rowe is the obvious choice right now. He just has played better in the first few weeks of training camp and preseason. There are still 2 games left, and McCourty, can still make a push. I will say he did not do himself favors in the second preseason game, especially against Shelton Gibson when Gibson
lost
just
him in the end zone.
It was embarrassing. McCourty just froze on a slant route fake, and then it was sort of a sluggo, like slant and go kind of thing, where Gibson fakes the slant, heads to the corner of the end zone, and McCourty was nowhere near him. So I don't know. It just basically we don't have enough information yet on this group because so much is up in the air. It really is a position where I think in mini camp we were saying, wow, this is going to be insanely competitive, and now I don't know. It's definitely a big competition and it's up for grabs and very open, but maybe not quite as competitive as we thought. Keon Crossan committed 3 penalties in the preseason game. Jason McCourty got torched. J.C. Jackson clearly solid, but still working on the kinks after going undrafted this offseason. And, we know Eric Rowe had some difficulties last year in the Super Bowl and in other places. So, it's definitely an open competition and maybe not the most competitive of open competitions.
Yeah, I think, the certainly the asterisk or what you need to keep in mind when considering the Patriots secondary is they're not playing the way they would play in terms of scheme in the regular season. And that is what is so hard to decipher when evaluating a position like the defensive backfield, because Bill has always said the pass rush is connected to the coverage and the coverage is connected to the pass rush, and it's like an accordion going back and forth. They're definitely connected, and you can't evaluate one without the other.
A very good point. Yeah, you look at how complicated the Patriots coverages can get too, and you'll know that the Patriots aren't even really scratching the surface on this sort of tricky switches and different things that they can do schematically. So that's a test of, mental aptitude and physical ability to move from where you're supposed to be pre-snap, which is a total illusion of what you're going to actually do after the snap. Patriots do that so well, and they're going to have a different defensive coordinator with Brian Flores, but I imagine they're probably going to keep doing those things. And sort of tying into your thought of how the pass rush relates to the defensive backs, we've seen a really strong play. We have seen really strong play from the pass rush this preseason. We've seen aggressive blitzes and stuff like that. And I'm not so sure that will necessarily continue into the regular season. I think that we see a lot an aggressive approach in the preseason from the Patriots, and then all of a sudden they soften a little bit once regular season rolls around. And I've always wondered if it's a bit of schematic misdirection where the Patriots sort of pretend like they're going to be hyper aggressive and get after the quarterback because this is the year. But I think back to like the year that Gerard Mayo was sent on a bunch of blitzes up the middle, during preseason. I can't remember the year exactly, but all of a sudden he was racking up sacks in the preseason or pressures, and then the Patriots just went back to doing what they always did, which is Gerard Mayo was an inside linebacker who played every down but wasn't a blitzing linebacker. So I think that with less pressure in the regular season and less aggressiveness in the regular season, that will also impact the defensive backs who will have to do longer bouts of coverage, and in different ways because there will be more people dropped into coverage.
Henry, how can people follow you on Twitter and online?
So I write for Patriots Wire, as you said, so people can log on to patriotswire.com. We've got tons and tons of coverage of not just news, but also analysis and list-driven stuff. So lots of easy to digest information that's plenty detailed. And you can also follow me on Twitter at McKenna Analysis, McKennAnalYsis. I write about Pats. I also write for The Big Lead about national stuff, whether it's NFL or NBA. So you'll get a little bit of everything, but mostly Patriots coverage.
We'll have to have you on again soon and maybe mix in a little bit in NBA because I don't know if you know, but CLNS loves themselves some Celtics and NBA rivalry stuff. So we'll probably have to have you on again, Henry.
Yeah, that would be super fun. Yep.
I appreciate you taking time out, Henry. Really great conversation. I want to thank everyone for downloading today's podcast. Thank our great guest, Henry McKenna, and our sponsors, Boston Barber and Tattoo, Game Time, and RX Bar. For our producer, Mike Alonji, our executive producer, Larry H. Russell, and the founder of the network, Nick Gelso. This is Mike Petralia, and this has been the Patriots Beat podcast on the CLNS Media Network.